It's hard to believe that we are halfway through Local Government Citizens Academy of 2020. This is just shocking to me as I think about this is session number 4. Thank you all for coming again. It's always such a pleasure to have all of our neighbors representing their community. I wanted to first shout out to Nick Shantz and Alex Fergario in the back there. Come on and wave. Yes. They were cadets in our program last year. Both of them ended up running for city council this year, and they put in a really great effort. But we've also said you can't let a failure deter you. So I wouldn't at all be surprised to see them put their hat back in the race or something along those lines.
Very soon we'll be releasing our Missoula Political Team podcast, Missoula Roundabout.
Really?
Yeah.
You're not pulling my chain on that?
No.
Are you going to make stickers?
I got some stickers.
Awesome. And our snacks over here tonight are compliments of Alex. There was something about how did you make the meatballs?
It's what they call semi-homemade. It's a frozen meatball. The sauce is barbecue and grape jelly and then some seasonings.
Whoa. Who would have thunk?
Grape jelly is very soft.
The secret. Well, thank you very much. All right, so tonight our two topics are going to be both our quality of life issues. So number one is our housing and community development, Erin Cahn over here, as well as Donna Gockler in our Parks Department. Both of these ladies I have come to really, really treasure. A couple weeks ago I was on the radio on KGVO, and the caller said to me that he thought I was a socialist. And I said, no, I'm not a socialist. And then I got to thinking about it. I'm like, well, why would he feel that way? And I think it's because we sometimes value the different departments of what our city government does differently. And so I think a lot of folks have a priority on safety, fire, police that we saw last week, along with transportation. And when we think of those elements, it's perfectly fine to be socialist about those things, because they are expensive to do otherwise. And I don't think anybody in this room would prefer to have roads that were toll roads everywhere you went, right? The thing of it is, we all have to live in a community together. And part of why we have all chosen to stay here in Missoula, Montana, which is a town we all know is very expensive, we stay here because of the quality of life. And these two women in particular head departments that really very much contribute to that quality of life. Erin Cahn, she and I go back to the days where we both were at the Poverello. She was the executive director, and I served on the board and as president during a very critical time when we moved from downtown to now the location on Broadway. She has a heart that is as big as you can possibly imagine. She has always felt that she's always been very cognizant of other people's positions in the house, not just for herself, but always trying to think about what it must be like for someone who is less fortunate. And I think that she brought that to the position at the Poverello. And she brings that to our Office of Housing and Community Development. Donna, she and I got to co-present at the Montana League of Cities and Towns. My presentation was presenting on Local Government Citizens Academy, and her portion of the presentation was on servant leadership. And it's a different kind of mentality about how do we make you as citizens, and hopefully, Donna, you can do a better job of explaining this when you get up here. And I know you have lots to talk about, but that in particular really kind of lends itself to a way of leadership. And both of these women embody that notion. And so without further ado, I think Erin, why don't you start us off? And Erin, would you like questions as you go along, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So, ask away. Oh, and one more thing. Amber, one of my other colleagues here in council, Amber Sherrill, representing Ward 4, is also here tonight. Will you be here for that?
No, I'm the Parks and Conservation Chair, so I thought this was a good one for me to
So hello, my name's Erin Cahn, and I'm recovering from the thing that everyone in this town has right now. So I'll apologize for not being able to talk a bit louder. But as Heather mentioned, please ask questions throughout. I want to make sure that you get out of the next 45 or so minutes what you need to get out of it, and so we can tailor the conversation to questions. And then also I don't have to listen to myself talk for so long, which is always a beautiful thing. So I would like to spend some time tonight just talking with you about what we do in our office, some of our initiatives and some of the policy work that we're doing that is incredibly exciting to us right now. I feel a little guilty, as I'm sure Donna does as well, that we, our two departments kind of get to do the cool work at the City of Missoula. We get to do the really fun things that speak to our values as a community. And one of the primary lenses that we use in our work is the lens of inclusivity and social equity. Our community is growing at a rapid, breakneck pace and speed right now. And I think there's significant fear across the community that as we adapt to that growth, that people are being left behind. And so that's the primary focus of our work, is to make sure that as we grow as a community, we grow in ways that continue to provide opportunity for everyone to thrive, not just folks that can keep up with that pace. We also are really cognizant of folks who already have been left behind by our community, and what we need to do to make space for those individuals, whether it's through housing, whether it's through programs that promote what we call third spaces, which we'll talk a little bit about, spaces in our community that provide opportunity for connection and for belonging for everyone, regardless of whether they have the ability to pay. Those spaces are often public libraries, they're often community centers, they're parks where people can find a space and know that this is a community where they still belong, regardless of what they're making, regardless of their housing situation, regardless of their health, their behavioral health situation. And so we'll run through some of those programs, and again, please ask questions as we go. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but our mission is to create a diverse and vibrant Missoula. We focus on that through a variety of initiatives and offices within our division. We focus primarily on increasing housing options that are affordable to all levels of our community. And we've done that most recently through the adoption of a really comprehensive-wide city housing policy that we'll talk more about. We also want to ensure that we have a strong safety net for people living in poverty through the implementation of Reaching Home, which is our community's 10-year plan to end homelessness. And we also fund a lot of what's called anti-poverty initiatives through federal funds that we receive from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We want to support economic development opportunities throughout our community, opportunities that are providing living wage jobs and are helping individuals with social mobility. We also want to support thriving neighborhoods and engage Missoula residents through their neighborhood councils. So the Office of Neighborhoods falls within our division, and we're really, really passionate about making sure that our neighborhood councils provide representation and represent the diversity of our community. And then lastly, really continuing Missoula's long history of conservation and climate action through adhering to what we call the triple bottom line, so thinking about people, our planet, and prosperity. And we do that through a variety of initiatives that we'll briefly touch on tonight as well. So first, talking a little bit about our housing policy. So our housing policy, which is titled A Place to Call Home, was adopted in June of this year and was really built around these four tenets or visions. Really thinking about the end outcome of what safe and secure housing provides to our community, and what we are jeopardizing or what risk is associated with not providing that safe and secure housing. So looking at those macro level goals, things like educational success for children. We know that homelessness and housing instability is a generational issue, and it leads to systemic poverty. When I worked at the Poverello Center, specifically at the Joseph Residence, which was our transitional housing program for families experiencing homelessness, 85% of families who were experiencing homelessness also experienced homelessness as a youth. So we know that it's a generational cycle and one that people really struggle to break free from. So looking at supporting a robust local economy, and this is at all levels of our local economy. We have heard recently from the tech sector, not surprisingly, but also from the healthcare sector, that they're having significant difficulty, increasing difficulty recruiting healthcare professionals to our community, largely because those professionals can go work at another community for a similar salary with lower housing costs. And so making sure we're thinking about how that's impacting our community. Thinking about community health. Housing is healthcare. When you are unhoused or precariously housed, it is very difficult to address your medical needs, either acute or chronic health needs. And so knowing that housing stability is the first step in that. And then also thinking about how people can improve their circumstances and thrive in our community. In America, homeownership is still really the primary and only way to generate wealth. The equity that you build in your home is the wealth that you generate that allows for that social mobility. And so when when a large segment of our population is left out of that equation, it becomes very difficult to engage in social mobility that allows you to move out of poverty or move out of housing instability. So this slide just talks a little bit about the primary tenets in the housing policy that we adopted. You can find all this information on our website. One thing we're really proud about with the housing policy adoption is how community-driven it was. So this policy effort didn't happen overnight. It took some time, and that's because we directly reached out and partnered with over 3,000 Missoulians in the development of this housing policy. That means over 3,000 Missoulians fingerprints are directly on the document that was finally passed by City Council. We made significant changes to that document into those recommendations as a result of that engagement, and it's a much, much better product and a much better roadmap for us as a result of that. The three key recommendations, and I know that's probably hard for you to see, the gray box above talks about how we need to track and analyze and continually improve our process. So that's the frame through which we view everything. We got some feedback during the process that our recommendations were too aggressive. On the other side, we got feedback that our recommendations were not aggressive enough. And that tracking is incredibly important because that tells us along the way if we're not being aggressive enough. It allows us to pivot when we need to and to change our approach. And so we're constantly tracking our progress and making sure that we're moving in the direction we want to move in. The other three boxes talk about our three key areas that our recommendations flow from. The orange box up there talks about aligning and leveraging our existing resources to support housing development, and so that we can be more strategic in our investments and expenditures as a city. One of those recommendations is to create an affordable housing trust fund so we can use the funds we have at our disposal today better and think about how we can raise additional funds to support the construction of affordable housing. The blue box talks about reducing barriers to the construction of affordable housing. In many ways, especially as it applies to single-family home ownership, it really is market-driven. It's a supply and demand market. And so the more homes that can be built, the lower prices we're going to see those homes come in at. And so we want to make sure that our regulations are protecting our values as a community, but we also want to make sure that they're clear, that they're predictable, and that they make sense. And then lastly, partnering to create and preserve true affordable housing. And when we talk about true affordable housing, typically we're talking about housing that is affordable for folks making lower incomes in our community. Housing affordability is a pretty general term. Housing that's affordable to you may or may not be affordable to me. Generally, it's 30% of your average income going towards housing that makes that affordable to you. When we talk about partnering to create and preserve true affordable housing, we're oftentimes talking about partnerships with organizations like Homeowners, who create and maintain deed-restricted kind of income-qualifying housing in Missoula, beautiful housing that you may have seen, the Equinox, the Solstice. But we know that Homeward and the Missoula Housing Authority and the Human Resource Council, they can't dig us out of this problem on their own, nor should we expect them to. So we have to partner in new and creative ways with the private sector, with contractors across the community to achieve our goals.
Can you give examples of how you utilize any of those boxes during the past year?
Yeah, so we have made some significant progress on a few of these areas and are in process with some other areas. For example, under aligning and leveraging existing resources, an on-the-ground project that you may have heard of is the construction of, it's called the Trinity Project, and Trinity Project is going to construct over 200 deed-restricted, permanently affordable rental homes on a parcel of land off Broadway that was invested into this project by Missoula County. Additionally, the City of Missoula is investing in this project through carrying the tax-exempt bonds and waiving fees associated with those bonds, which equates to about $750,000 over the life of the loan. And so that is a way that we were able to really align and leverage sources that we had at our disposal today to create more impact and leverage in private resources. We're bringing in over $30 million in private investment in this project through that contribution by the city and by the county. So that's a great example of a tool that kind of hits that orange box. In terms of reducing barriers, we will have a suite of updates to Title 20, which is our land use code, that will be coming in front of City Council this spring, that address some barriers to construction of ADUs, that address some parking barriers across the community and in some of our code, and a few other areas. And so we'll be addressing pieces in code through that. And then again, partnering to preserve and create affordable housing, we're addressing that in several ways as well. Again, the Trinity Project is a great example of that partnership. We also are constantly working with our partners like Homeowners and the Missoula Housing Authority to preserve affordable housing that exists today. Many of these programs are used with funding that it's called sunsets. The term is called sunsets, but essentially after a period of time, the owner is allowed to stop renting them as affordable units and start renting them at market rate units. And so our goal is when that sunset date hits, we want to have our partners like Homeward and like MHA positioned to go in and purchase those properties from the current owner to reset that clock of affordability for another 40 years. And so a lot of that will come through different creative financing tools as well. We probably have 40 or more recommendations in each of those buckets, and the plan, it's about 90 pages long. I think about 5 people have read it. But there's a really great 5-page executive summary that goes through each individual area and talks about some of the macro level themes of those recommendations. Here's just a really quick timeline that shows how this process started in 2016 with the creation of a housing steering committee, folks in the industry and across the community that really served to set the vision for housing policy creation, through the establishment of technical working groups, and then that really robust community process where all those folks had their hand in creating this policy, through adoption and implementation. And you can find on our website as well some links to both recorded videotaped updates to City Council and actual PowerPoint presentation updates that will tell you where we're at on policy implementation today, what we've achieved, and what we hope to achieve in the next 6 months.
Before you go on here, by show of hands, who here participated in any part of that process when it comes down to our housing policy? One. What did you think of the process? What do you got to?
I thought it was a great process. I actually did the work study where we got the canvas.
You were a canvasser. Yes, I remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was great to go through.
And that's a great example. It's Sue. Is it Sue?
Yeah.
Right? Yes. Good to see you. That's a great example of the outreach that we did that was different than the traditional city process. We worked with the Masters in Public Administration program to identify a few neighborhoods that we knew we weren't hearing from. These were neighborhoods that qualify through the census as low to moderate income neighborhoods, neighborhoods that we knew had barriers to engagement because they couldn't come to an evening meeting or they didn't have childcare. So instead of requiring them to come to us, we worked with these phenomenal students who door knocked in their neighborhood and went to them and said, what matters to you? What is impacting your housing situation? They were much better, much more well-crafted than that. But and really brought such phenomenal feedback to us that we wouldn't have otherwise had. It's a great example. All right. So just to go a little bit into some of our grant work and how we fund some of this innovative partnership and these projects like the Trinity, we do receive 2 funding sources from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. One is called Community Development Block Grant Funding, and this funding can help us pay for public services, connection to public services, infrastructure, economic development, housing acquisition, rehab, cleanup. Some of the types of projects that we have funded with this include the YWCA's Meadowlark facility expansion, and that's a schematic right there. That is the new family emergency homeless and domestic violence shelter that's being built on 3rd Street, a phenomenal project. Homeownership Center for Educational Center, where they provide first-time homeownership education and help folks really get prepared for venturing into that process. The River Acres Water Infrastructure Connection is a really fascinating project, and it is a great example of funding connection to public infrastructure that directly impacts folks' housing stability. And so River Acres is what's called a resident-owned community. And a resident-owned community is a very special model that is deployed by NeighborWorks Montana and NeighborWorks USA, where they go in and assist mobile home park tenants who own their mobile homes but not the land underneath. They assist them in creating a cooperative and purchasing the land underneath them. So instead of kind of being at the whim of the park owner for annual increases in lease rents or being evicted at any point in time, they immediately create stability in their housing. And what we see is that the land payment that they end up paying as a cooperative member is oftentimes significantly less than the lot rent that they were paying prior to the formation of the cooperative and the purchase of that land. And so we were able to help River Acres connect to the city water system, which again dramatically impacts the stability of their housing. And then sidewalk infrastructure improvements.
What part of town is River Acres?
It's off River, in the River Road neighborhood. And then sidewalk infrastructure. Infrastructure is really important when you talk about housing for a couple of reasons. Some of our most densely developed neighborhoods, like Franklin to the Fort and Northside Westside, are lacking really good sidewalk infrastructure. That creates safety issues for kids as they're walking to school in the very dark mornings in the winter. It also creates issues for accessibility in terms of folks being able to get around their neighborhoods. And so as we see these neighborhoods continue to build out quite densely with apartment buildings and all types of housing, we need to make sure that they have that infrastructure to support them. All right. And then our next grant program here is called the Home Investment Partnership Fund. It works very similarly to CDBG, except the funds are used a little bit differently, primarily for construction or homeownership activity. Examples of projects we're funding with this include the Villaggio. We've been able to fund over $1 million into the Villaggio, which is another 200-unit apartment building that's being built on the north side. And those rents will be capped at 60% of area median income. That means whereas the average one-bedroom apartment in Missoula rents for about $900 now, these units will rent for about $450. And they have to take utilities and other expenses into account. And so, and those rents will be fixed at 60% of area median income for 45 years. And so it's a long-term investment in our community. Also, home buyer down payment assistance. That's becoming increasingly important as folks are being kind of pushed out of that market. We work with people on a daily basis whose income qualifies them, would allow them to pay a mortgage on a median-priced home in Missoula, but they can't get over that hurdle of having that down payment assistance to help get them into that home and help buy down mortgage insurance and other expenses that go into that. And so through this program, we're able to provide for qualifying households who make below 80% of area median income, we're able to provide up to $35,000 in down payment assistance. When that home sells in the future, that money comes back to us and we're able to lend that out to another household. And then lastly, the Montana Street Small Homes Project. I love this project. This is an actual picture of these small homes. And so a couple of years ago, Homeward came to us and said, we have this opportunity. We've been contacted by this housing provider, and they have access to several dozen modular homes that were ordered right before the Bakken boom died. And so these were all delivered to what they referred to as a man cube, wrapped in bubble wrap and never opened. And so we were able to help Homeward procure these small modular homes and purchase a parcel right by the new food bank on Wyoming Street through which to place these homes. I think there were 6 homes in total that we helped fund, and the average median home sales price in Missoula right now is tipping $300,000. These homes sold for between $120,000 and $140,000 each.
What is the source of these partnership funds?
So these all come from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, through the federal government. And they're allotted to communities that are called entitlement communities. There are only 3 in the state that meet the population criteria to be an entitlement community: Missoula, Billings, and Great Falls. And then they're awarded to us based on a calculation that takes into account our total population, our number of low-income census tracts, and other factors, one of which distressed communities. So, for example, Great Falls gets a significantly larger entitlement allocation than we do, based on the fact that they have many more low-income census tracts, and the Air Force Base actually qualifies them as a distressed area. So even though they're a smaller population, they get about double the allocation we get. Just a random fact.
I didn't hear where you said they came from, and then how many do we have?
The unit? Yeah, so they came from eastern Montana, and we helped them purchase 6. They have 4 more that are in the process of trying to find a parcel to place in total.
Why were they in eastern Montana? How did that?
So they were purchased by a company to house folks who were working in the oil fields. And then the oil fields dried up, and they weren't needed. And so we got them at a really great slash and burn sale.
So I'm wondering, for something like this, when you buy this, how much did you look into what the homes were made of, just to be careful for any kind of toxic emissions that would cause low-income folks to be living in them and then have health problems?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, how did we make sure they were safe? And so all of the homes have to be built, and not all manufactured housing is, but they have to be built following the building code, the governing building code. And so these were built and certified following governing building code, and then they were also tested. So all of the homes were tested for contaminants, and one did come up as positive for some contaminants and had to be professionally remediated before it could be rehabbed and sold.
Are there any programs for homeowners that have land and get the help to plop a tiny house on their property in the works?
Yeah, so are there programs to help people who want to build ADUs? This is a really fascinating trend that we're seeing nationwide. So accessory dwelling units are a really powerful way to add housing stock to your community when you have very limited geography. Missoula fits that bill. We're not like Bozeman, we're not like Kalispell. We can't just keep sprawling into the next neighborhood because we're confined by all the things we love, rivers and mountains, and that makes it challenging for us. ADUs are a great way that we can provide additional rental stock for college students, where intergenerational housing can occur. So if I am an aging individual and I have a very large home and I want to build an ADU, I can rent that out to a college student or maybe someone who can help me with some things around the house. And then when my big house becomes too much for me, I can live in the ADU and I can rent out my big house. And so it provides a lot of options. We currently don't have a lot of incentives for ADU development, but that's something we're looking really heavily at.
Why would you not have incentives with people are talking about needing 800 more homes in a year?
We don't have incentives because we don't have money yet.
Oh, okay.
So we're working on that. So part of that is the creation of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and there are ways to incentivize without money, and we're looking at that as well. Things like waiving an impact fee, or being able to subsidize a building permit fee.
Right.
Some communities like Portland recently passed a $145 million affordable housing bond, so they have a lot of money to incentivize with. Portland is building a free ADU in your backyard for you if you agree to lease it out to a current or formerly homeless individual for 5 years, and then after that 5-year period, it's yours to keep, no strings attached. And so communities are doing really innovative things around that, and I think for us, it's definitely one of those things that we definitely think has a lot of potential and will prioritize. we have to get the resources in place to do that.
It seems to me that some of that is happening around town without incentives, because I've seen properties where people will buy the property, fix up the house, divide it in half, put a fence up, and once the house in front sells, they'll have the money to build the ADU in the back.
We are seeing a lot. We are seeing a lot of small lot development, either ADU or building actually another, small home on the lot. So you're right. Just our last federal grant source here is the Brownfields Assessment Grant. This comes from the Environmental Protection Agency and provides us money to do many of the things you were just talking about, to test sites, to try to determine if there were contaminants on a site, and then provide money to clean up those sites. The Poverello Center and the Food Bank are phenomenal examples of that. The new Poverello Center was built on the former Trails End site, which had a lot of really interesting things on it, including an underground safe buried in layers of concrete. But it also had a lot of automotive contamination. The new Missoula Food Bank was built on a site that was a former sugar beet mill and had significant sugar beet waste, which creates methane, which creates instability in the ground. And so both of those parcels were relatively cheap because they were contaminated, and the cheapness speaks to us nonprofit folks, but they needed significant cleanup work. So we were able to use these funds to go in and take that expense away from that project to make those projects possible. Just a little bit of another sample of work that we've done. The Brownfields program spent over $2 million in cleaning up contaminated soil in what is now Silver Park, the former Intermountain lumber site. And so I think this is a great example of how you can use federal dollars to leverage potential future private development. So overall, the city has helped to attract more than $5 million in Brownfields funds over the last decade in that program, which in turn has leveraged more than $26 million in cleanup and redevelopment efforts across our community. Most of that going towards projects like Silver Park, like the Poverello Center, like the Food Bank, that have direct impacts on quality of life for almost all Missoulians.
How involved do you get with contacting congressmen in regards to passing budgets that reduce these kind of federal funds that could be affected? Do you get to have have people in your organization who write letters, go to those kinds of meetings, make that kind of contact?
We try to keep our delegations really informed about the power of the programs that receive these types of funding and the power of the work at a local community level, and help them understand what happens if those funds go away. We're quite lucky in that all three of these funding sources are really supported in a bipartisan way. The EPA funds and both CDBG and Home are really impactful at a local community level. So we see Republican and Democrat delegations alike continuing to fund and support these programs. So they're not at risk in the same way that many other programs are. We've seen increases in funding consistently over the last decade or so in all of these sources. We haven't had to do too much advocacy, thankfully. All right, just want to touch on really briefly our 10-year plan to end homelessness. As we talked about, we are 7 years into our 10-year plan and have made really dramatic progress in the last 2 to 3 years alone. Some of the tenets of this plan are, again, ensuring that all people have rapid access to safe, long-term housing that's sustainable for them. That means different things for everyone. We always like to point out that while the plans, this is a federal initiative and the plans are all termed plans to end homelessness, we know we will never end the experience of homelessness, but our goal is to make sure that when individuals fall into homelessness that it's rare, brief, and one time only, and we shoot towards what's called a functional zero definition. That means for every person who is experiencing homelessness for the first time, we want to make sure someone's exiting homelessness. So we don't have 24 people falling into homelessness and we're only able to house one person and bring them out of that system. So one of the most impactful things we've done in the last 2 years in this realm is to initiate what's called the Missoula Coordinated Entry System. So through the city's leadership and the leadership of Teresa Williams, who is our Reaching Home Coordinator. We worked with providers in our community to create a system that ended costly duplication of services. Previously, we have heroic service providers in this realm who are on the front lines doing the hard work every day and don't have the ability to kind of be the architects of the plan at a really macro level. And so what we would often see is we would have one very high needs client who maybe is bouncing between the jail, the hospital system, our shelter system, and he's got a case manager over here, and he's got a case manager over here, and he's got a housing specialist over here, and a probation officer over here, and none of those individuals are talking to each other, but they're all spending dozens of hours a month trying to support this individual. And so what the Missoula Coordinated Entry System does is it takes what we refer to as dozens of caseloads around the community, and it creates one caseload. And on that one caseload, we prioritize individuals based on the severity of their need, and we serve folks with the most severe needs first, and we work down the list. A great example of the success of this program, in the last year alone, we have connected 20 individuals who are residing in the Reserve Street encampment with housing. Previously, in the last decade that I've worked in the homeless service realm, we have connected 0 people from the Reserve Street encampment to housing. And so a really powerful example of how coordinating our efforts is going to get us much, much further in our goal. And there's a lot of documentation and a lot of detail on the success of this plan and where we're at right now in the plan on our website. I want to read more about that. And then energy conservation and climate action. We're doing some really cool things at the City of Missoula around energy conservation and climate action. Unlike some of our other large policy initiatives, like our housing policy, where there's a lot of work that we're going to do internally to set policy, create ordinance, create law around housing, our energy conservation and climate action plan, it really is privately driven. It's about partnership. So how can we lead out in terms of the types of things that we want to support, things like carbon neutrality by reducing and eliminating greenhouse gas emissions, things like zero waste, eliminating our waste in our city facilities and plants. We want to lead out on those issues, but then we really want to partner with and incentivize the private sector in the community to follow suit, whether that's an individual in their home and how they live their lives, or whether that's the University of Montana or St. Patrick Hospital or Community Medical Center. So it's more about really creating a movement in our community and getting folks in alignment with the goals that are outlined in the plan. These plans rely on really, really deep partnership with folks like Climate Smart Missoula, Home Resource in our community, who partners with us on our zero waste work. And I think all of the plans are a reflection of that partnership and have their ideas and thoughts and fingerprints all over them as well. And then lastly, our Office of Neighborhood. So I talked a little bit about the city's commitment to engagement and public engagement. I'll also go ahead and say that the city also doesn't do a really great job at public engagement. So it's something we're really working on, and I don't think we don't do a great job because it's not a value that we're committed to. I think that most city process around public engagement is driven by legal process. And so if we have a land use decision that's going to be made, if we're establishing a new ordinance or a new law, the state law tells us we issue a advertisement for a public notice, we set a public hearing, we collect information, we report out on that information. We piloted a little bit more of a robust process through our housing policy. Parks does a brilliant job and is a leader in the city of Missoula in their engagement efforts. We're trying to take those efforts and push them out and help the city look at how we engage folks in a better and in a more meaningful way, so that we're not engaging in reactive conversations as a project or a policy comes before council that folks haven't had a chance to speak on or participate in, but that we're maintaining a constant conversation with our community, with our neighborhoods, with advocacy and civic groups, and that conversation is driving policy creation in a proactive way instead of in a reactive way. So we're currently in the process of looking at different frameworks that can support that, and looking at different tools and different processes that can help us learn how to do that better as well. And a lot of that work will come through our neighborhood councils and our neighborhood office.
Speaking of which, would you raise your hand so Erin knows how many of you participate in your local neighborhood council?
Yay!
That's quite a few.
That is amazing. Yeah. And then lastly, just a little bit about the community development partnerships that we engage in at the City of Missoula. I talked a little bit about our primary lenses of social equity and inclusivity and our passion about those third spaces. We received earlier this year a $2 million grant from the National Institute of Health to partner with the University of Montana through the Broader Impact Group and through Spectrum to create a third space in the LINK, our new public library. This third space has the primary goal of inspiring Montana's next generation healthcare workforce, and so looking at how we can energize and inspire youth in our community around the STEM. They're also now adding an A for arts, which I love, or the STEAM, around STEAM education. In one way that we propose to do that for our very, very youngest community members is through a really cool DNA climber. And so that will be a focal point of the public library and will be visible as you enter the library on Main Street. In addition to that aspect for our youngest community members, we'll be creating educational curriculum for folks or for children in middle school and in high school through the construction and programming around a community lab. And so this will be lab space, again, actually in the public library that educators across the community can use to support access to those STEAM sciences. And then lastly, it will create mobile educational programming through the creation of STEAM trunks, which is, I'm realizing now, oddly relevant. STEAM trunks that can travel to schools in our rural communities and in our tribal communities that don't have ready daily access to that curriculum. And so taking that broad-based approach. The library, to me, just really is the epitome of that third space, of a place where everyone can and should feel welcome, and especially for parents of young children in Missoula, either in the cold, dark winter months or in the now growing smoky, hot summer months, to have a space where they can bring their kids that is safe and engaging and serves kind of a larger purpose.
You talked about
Yeah, I think when you think about Cares Park and you think about the types of programming that are offered there, whether it's out to lunch in the park or a concert in the park or just being able to be in the park, again, that ability for social connection, being around folks, that welcoming environment, anyone can come. There aren't a lot of places, I can tell you from my years working in homeless services, there aren't a lot of places that you can show up to with every personal belonging on your back and be welcome. So places you can show up to with your pack and your tent and your dog, and be welcomed into that space, I think are really important for folks. Yeah. And then I just wanted to, again, give the plug. Montana James is our community development manager, and she does a beautiful job with our website. So you'll find a plethora of documents, more than you would ever want to read, on her website about process, policy, updates on all of our plans and all of our initiatives, and we are very accessible to you as well. So we always have time to sit down with folks and answer any follow-up questions that you might have. And then, of course, any questions you have right now.
So I work at Missoula Housing Authority, so I'm kind of familiar with the Trinity Project, and I think it's a wonderful collaborative project. The only, it's different from what Missoula Housing is used to because it's going to include a social services aspect. I'm just wondering how the social services is going to be paid for.
Yeah, so great question. So Trinity, which is this project we referenced before, which is going to be 130 units of permanent supportive housing on the Mullen Road site, and then on another site we'll be constructing 70 units of permanent housing for families, so 2 to 3 bedroom units. On the Mullen Road site, we are also working in a 10,000 square foot navigation center. So navigation centers are really well known for being kind of a one-stop shop, a place where no one will get turned away who is experiencing homelessness, who is struggling with health or behavioral health issues, or who is struggling with addiction. So again, when we talk about the Missoula Coordinated Entry System, those hubs for folks to come and get connected to services. The Trinity is actually being constructed with a really innovative financing model where the developers, who are Homeward Blue Line Development Corporation here in Missoula and the Missoula Housing Authority, are able to pull $1 million out of the construction budget for that project, which is being funded through leveraged tax credits, which is a private investment tool, and reserve that for supportive programming for the future. And so that allows that programming to be more sustainable than a lot of other programming that we see going up, where they have to, on an annual basis, fundraise and create funding drives and apply for grants.
I work as a volunteer with the Community Dispute Resolution Center, mediating cases with in justice court. And most of those are landlord-tenant disputes. And it occurred to me that maybe Homeward might have some way of fashioning a little education component for people, for low-income people, when they get housing vouchers, or at some point when they enter the system, where they would know what they're up against when they come into those kind of cases. Because I see people kind of being taken advantage of by lawyers and stuff because they don't know what their rights are. Is that anything that anyone's ever thought about, or does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, providing tenant education is a really important factor. We have a couple of programs here in Missoula, but we're really underserved. And so Homeward does have a couple of programs. One of those is called Financial Fitness, and in that they do talk some about how to be a good renter from a budgetary perspective. They also have in the past taught a renter education course as well. There are a couple of things that work against us in the state of Montana. One is that we're a no-fault eviction state. A landlord can evict anyone at any point in time for any or no reason at all. And so we do see a lot of evictions that are disputed unsuccessfully because a landlord is within their legal authority to do that. We see a lot of discrimination for source of payment. As you mentioned, she worked at the Housing Authority. If I go and apply for an apartment and say, I have a housing voucher, your full rent is going to be paid. With a housing voucher, it's actually more secure that your rent's going to be paid than a lot of other situations. They can say, I don't like housing vouchers, I don't like people who have them, I'm not renting to you. And in the state of Montana, that's legal. You can discriminate against someone based on their form of income. And so we have a lot of state laws, I think, that make that difficult. But there is still a lot of education that can and need to occur, especially around tenant rights in the safety and security of their unit. There's a lot of substandard housing in the city of Missoula, and a lot of folks just live with that because they fear the retribution if they call in a complaint because their water heater hasn't worked in 3 months, or their stairs are crumbling and they're scared they're going to fall down them when they leave their house. They don't want to get evicted, and so they don't call those in. And so that's a really big issue as well. We were working with Forward Montana for quite a while last year, and the effort kind of stalled, but we're hopeful to pick that back up on the creation of a tenant bill of rights. It's largely an educational tool. It would have no legal authority behind it, but to help people understand what their rights as a tenant are, and how they can enforce those rights and how they can protect themselves within that. Because I think education is a really powerful tool in that realm. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you can share this PowerPoint.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. This is really fascinating. And I don't want this question to come across as not supporting the addition of more housing.
No.
I do wonder also, though, with these really large units, like the Bellagio, which is a great name, by the way, the impact that has on the neighborhood in terms of, I don't know if they have to have parking as part of their structure. There are more people driving on the road, more people walking the sidewalks, wanting to use the parks that are nearby. So how are those sorts of downstream effects taken into account to make sure that it doesn't just create different problems?
That's a really good question. And we have to be thoughtful about growth and about where we grow as well. So our development review process, and I'm not sure if you've had a chance to hear from Development Services yet, you will. Our development review process is really thorough and takes some of those things into account. For example, Donna and her division at Parks, they review these projects and they ensure that these projects set aside adequate parkland to serve the individuals that live within that, apartment complex. They're also looking at, is it a park deficit area, and do we need to create more parks in that area generally to better serve that neighborhood? Our transportation division looks at traffic counts, and if a project is big enough or a neighborhood's kind of on the cusp of growing to a new threshold, they'll require a traffic study, and they'll study how many trips that specific apartment building will create, and what those trip counts tell us. Do they tell us we need a signaled light there? Do they tell us we need some upgrades to that road? They also look at pedestrian facilities and sidewalks. Are they adequate? Upgrades to all of those services that parkland set aside, all of those happen at the cost of the developer. So the developer is required of building out that infrastructure and addressing the impacts on the neighborhood. It's still important to be thoughtful about where we grow, though, because we don't want to put all these huge, large developments in one area of town. It's something we're hearing a lot about when we talk about social equity. We're hearing a lot from a lot of neighborhoods about that right now. We have over 450 units of low-income housing tax credit, this deed-restricted permanent affordable housing being built in the next 3 years. All of those units are being built in 2 neighborhoods, in Northside, Westside, and in Central Missoula. And so there are concerns right now that there isn't equity in terms of where our affordable housing is being built. It's not being built across the community, and so that's something we have to pay very close attention to. Largely right now, that is because that Northside, Westside, and Central Missoula are two of the only neighborhoods that have significant parcels that are zoned to build multifamily housing. For example, the University area, Lower Miller Creek, Lewis and Clark, Rose Park, they're all predominantly zoned single family. So these types of developments can't be built in those neighborhoods today. And so those are all conversations about equity that I think our community's having and trying to figure out how we strike that balance.
Can you speak to the main...
Oh, Farland, Montana. I was just talking about you.
Yeah, we should discuss that.
Kind of feel right. Yeah.
Can you speak to the new role of the Landlord Liaison position and just how your department interacts with landlords, or they do at all?
Yeah, so we recently partnered with a couple of organizations in Missoula and successfully sought funding from Missoula County from their community-based organization fund to fund a full-time landlord liaison. That funding went to Homeward, and they hired a wonderful individual who is just new in that role. And the goal of that position is a little bit different from some of the others we have in the system. We have what's called a housing navigator. The primary goal of that housing navigator is to meet with folks who are currently homeless or precariously housed and to help them find housing in the community, put in housing applications, advocate on their behalf, help them navigate all the red tape associated with that system. We also have a housing retention specialist, and that person's job is to support individuals once they become housed. I talked about those 20 individuals from the Reserve Street encampment that we got housed. That is a phenomenal success, but that's only the start of that story. Many of those individuals have been living on the streets or in encampments for decades. They don't know how to live indoors. They don't know how to be a good tenant. And so we need to make sure that they have daily support to maintain those apartments that they worked so hard to get into. And this third addition to our coordinated entry system is this landlord liaison position. And this individual, unlike the other two that really focus on the individuals in need of housing, they focus on the landlord component. We currently have a rental vacancy rate of about 3.8%. Usually that's 2 to 3%. So the vacancy rate is increasing as we see more rentals built, which is a good thing. But a healthy vacancy rate nationally is around 6%. So we're still dramatically lower than we should be. And in a market that is that competitive, no landlord has to take a risk on anyone. Even for folks who have relatively decent credit and maybe 1 or 2 black marks, they can require easily a cosigner. They're requiring $4,000 in the door. They want first and last month and a double deposit. This is just renting in Missoula today. It's incredibly challenging. And so finding folks that are willing to take a risk either by accepting a housing voucher or renting to someone who has no rental history because they've been living on the streets for a decade is really, really difficult. And so the primary goal of that position is to build a portfolio of landlords who want to work with a program, who are willing to take a risk, and then figuring out how we can mitigate that risk by things like a guarantee or a cosign, having an organization like the Poverello Center or the YWCA work with that individual to mitigate risk by saying, no matter what happens, your rent is going to be paid. We're going to reserve a double deposit, and if any damage occurs, we're going to pay for that. Ironically, one of the things landlords fear the most is not that folks don't pay their rent, it's that folks abandon a unit and abandon all their belongings in a unit. They are then responsible for packaging and storing those belongings for up to 90 days. We found that one of the most powerful mitigation tools that we can use is by guaranteeing that if that unit gets abandoned, that we have a team of folks that are going to come and empty out and clean that unit for you. And so sometimes it's really small stuff that we need to do to kind of bring those folks on board. Yeah. Right, a couple more questions, and then I know we have to transition to Donna.
It was something I can't get out of my mind is your reference to what I think you call no-cause eviction rights for landlords.
Yeah.
You later referred to tenant rights. With that landlord right to evict for any reason, what rights do tenants have?
It's a great question. So, tenants have the right to a safe, inhabitable apartment. And so, again, looking at some of those substandard or safety issues. Apartments, there are a lot of apartments across the city of Missoula that do not meet building code. We don't want to go shut all those apartments down because then we would have a severe shortage, but what we want to do is work with those property owners to bring those up to code and to bring those up to a safe standard. They also have the right to, for example, not have their rent increase during their current lease term. So if somebody's within a year-long lease term, and that lease has been signed, the landlord can't just come and increase their rent. One thing that has been happening illegally in the city of Missoula for years, and the Supreme Court just recently ruled on this, is that landlords can't erroneously fine people for things. And we have a couple of very large property management companies in Missoula who have had to repay thousands and thousands of dollars for illegally fining folks. For example, assessing a $50 fine per day for a 2-week period if your rent is late. Assessing a $50 fine per day to have a guest in your unit that wasn't approved. So the Supreme Court has ruled that those fines are illegal. And so things of that nature. Yeah.
Do you know how many folks live in the reserve?
Yeah, that's a great question. At this point in time, we were down there a couple of weeks, well, just this week actually, and there are 11 active camps there, so 11 individuals. That's really fluctuated. Post-recession in 2009, when we hadn't yet to relocate the pub, we weren't able to serve everyone that was in need. We were seeing a really dire situation down there. There were about 65 active inhabitants of that camp. 3 of the camps had children under the age of 5. One of the camps had a 3-week-old newborn residing in it. So our efforts have been really successful in helping house those folks. I think we're always really careful. We talk to the community a lot about sweeping or cleaning up the encampments, and I think we just have to be careful in terms of how we think about that. If we have housing for everyone in our community and homeless shelters to meet all the urgent need, we're still going to see some folks sleeping outside for a variety of reasons. We serve a lot of veterans in the homeless shelter who cannot be indoors due to severe PTSD, combat-related trauma. They choose to stay outdoors because it feels safer to them. We have a lot of folks experiencing mental health symptomology, hallucinations, who otherwise are no danger to anyone, but again, cannot be in those close confined quarters. And so I think that the instance of folks living outdoors is probably always going to exist. Our goal is to mitigate that, both for the individuals who are staying outdoors and to try to house them as quickly as possible, and then to mitigate that for the community and be really swift in dealing with safety issues around that, safety and health issues around that.
Because I just started noticing it, like you say back in 2009, there were so many people.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice it down there.
Yeah.
So why did it change?
Yeah.
More press.
Yeah. It's kind of been put on folks' radar.
More trash,
Yeah.
more for 11 people. I'm
Yeah,
shocked.
yeah.
The trash is down at MacroLevel.
Yeah, there's a real coordinated response. We have, it's called the Missoula Coordinated Outreach Team, and there are folks from the Poverello Center, from Western Montana Mental Health Center, from the Missoula Police Department, from Union Gospel Mission, and they go down there 1 or 2 times a week. We have this phenomenal program called Outreach Grid, which is a real-time software, and it allows us, we go down there with an iPad, it allows us to track each camp, enter each camp with its actual latitude and longitude, how many inhabitants are living there, what their names are, if they're registered with a coordinated entry system. You can kind of drop a pin there, and then we know and can go back and check in with those camps. We can update those camp rosters. And so we have really good data. I think folks would be surprised. Some of our larger encampments exist in East Missoula, exist up the Kim Williams Trail. They're just not very visible because of where they're located. But the Reserve Street one is very visible and becomes more visible each year as that area floods and the spaces that they're camping in become closer to the highway as well. Yeah. All right, I want to not steal Donna's time because I think last year I stole a lot of her time. Thank you guys so much.
Erin and Donna both, are you able to meet on Friday at noon in case anybody would like to meet you for lunch? I scheduled the time at Headwaters.
Well, thank you for having me here. My name is Donna Gockler. I'm the Director of City Missoula Parks and Recreation. And I've been working with the city since 1991. My degree and background is in municipal parks and recreation with an emphasis on business. I've been in the business of Parks and Rec since the age of 15 when I got my first paying job. And I have a real passion for place and people and play. And so it's a pretty great fit for me. And I really, really like how Parks and Recreation has evolved. It's, I think, so much more than what many people realize. And hope to share some of that with you today. So I want to share a little bit, well, what is recreation and leisure? Because a lot of times as adults in our society we think play is discretionary and unnecessary, and it's just frivolous, or I'm living a life of leisure. And it's everything and so much more. And why does it matter? Why is city government, why would we put public dollars into parks and recreation? How do we determine what services we're going to deliver? What's new and changing, and then certainly questions. So, just a little thought here. If you think back to a time, maybe you were between the ages of 8 and 10, and you can remember a time that you might have enjoyed, and I want you, most of us, something pops into our heads pretty quick. Question, got in your mind what it was? How many of you were outside? Okay. How many of you were with a friend or family member? Okay. How many of you remember something about that moment that taught you a lesson, or you, for the first time, experienced something that somehow has had an impact because you're still remembering all these years later? Has anybody had that experience when they're out there? Okay. What we find with recreation is those experiences are what connect us with other people. It's how we connect with our children. It's how we connected with our parents or our grandparents. It's when we remember our best friends or our best coaches or dance instructors, our best experiences with music or drama. For a lot of us, especially in Missoula, I find that time was in the out of doors. Missoulians have a very significant passion for being outdoors. And so just keep in mind those special moments, and I know that most of you probably had one this weekend too. You might have enjoyed the snow at some point over the weekend. I hope you did. The other thing about parks and recreation in our community, I want you to think about this. Parks and Recreation manages the urban forest. Trees are our lungs. They will clean our air. They will clean our water so that they're lungs of our system. Our parks are like our living rooms. If you think about a park, everything happens there. Erin was just talking about being outdoors and going to a public place like the library or park. Our parks are our third places all over the place. And it's in our parks that almost everything happens. You know, people propose, they get married, kid has their first time on the playground, going down the slide, first swimming lesson. I've seen parents who separate. It's where they exchange their kids. It's where people take that other member of their family that's furry and four-legged, their dogs. It is sometimes where we see some of our homeless folks and where they can be during the day. But almost everything happens in a park, kind of like our living rooms are gathering places for our families. The other thing I think that is really neat about parks is we don't really look at the other visitors to the park as, ooh, wonder what political ilk they're from, or I wonder what religion, or I wonder, you know, what it... For the most part, people who show up in parks are just people. And that's the great thing about parks. You know, when you're walking down a trail, I've noticed that there's not, like, trail rage, like there is road rage. And when we walk in our neighborhoods on the sidewalks and going to the park with our dogs or with our kids, really quickly we get to recognize faces, right? You've all had this experience in your neighborhood. And then pretty soon you know each other's dog's name. And then eventually you get to know each other's kid's name, and sooner or later you actually get to know each other. Well, those opportunities that we create through walkable neighborhoods and going to our parks and trails, that's what makes our community, our neighborhood safer. It's how we start to identify ourselves. So parks really are about people and place. I'll talk more about conservation lands. They're certainly part of our ecosystem services. And those conservation lands, those open spaces, who doesn't identify with Mount Jumbo and Mount Sentinel and North Hills and Dean Stone and the Clark Fork River riparian area? Those are the places that we together choose to protect because it's important to our identity, to our place, and to our very being. And finally, the programs that are offered are really all about physical and mental health. They're our prescription for quality of life. So recreation. Recreation is any activity that takes place during free time, is enjoyable, benefits the individual, or at least is not harmful to self, others, or the environment. Really broad. Really broad. So if I'm not eating to survive, working to put food on the table and have housing, and sleeping for survival, that's my leisure time. Say, lecture with college students, and so I say, yes, going out for a beer is recreation. Going out for too many beers is not recreation anymore because it's no longer good for me. It becomes harmful either for myself or others. So very, very broad. And successful leisure, successful recreation should have a freedom of choice. I get to choose what I want to do. So one of the unique things about parks and recreation is there are very few things that we do or provide for the public that is mandated. There are very few regulations in anything related to parks other than safety and sanitation related things. So when I choose recreation, I want perceived competence. Okay, who hasn't felt really good there? Do you remember learning to ride a bike and the sense of freedom and competence that gains you? Intrinsic motivation. There's something inside me. There's a locus of control, and has a positive effect. So I say recreate. What do people love about Missoula? This is from the Growth Policy Study. The top 10 assets valued by the community, natural areas and outdoor recreation. Number 1, community involvement. We do that all the time. I see a lot of you here that I know that we've worked together on some trail or park project or program, and that's awesome. A sense of place. How many of us identify, I'm in the Rose Park area, I live over by Playfair Park, I live over by Fort Missoula, I'm by Bonner, I live by Westside Park. We definitely identify in that way, and if you look at houses for sale, They also identify by all these things. That's how they advertise their places. Bikeable, walkable neighborhoods. Parks are probably one of your most outspoken departments in the city for any mode other than driving. We don't speak out against driving, we believe in it. But what we're really looking to do is, how do all of those folks who cannot drive for any, whatever the reason be, it could be their age, it could be their financial situation, it can be their health. They can't drive, but you know what? If they can take transit, if they can walk on their sidewalk, if they can take one of our trails, they can still move. If I can move without having to own a car, I have saved considerable net income in my household. So part of our affordability equation is actually about having walkable neighborhoods and access to jobs, to school, to play, and our ability to get around. People say they like family-friendly places. We just talked about that. When Parks and Recreation actually came up as a thing, I was okay, folks. I remember having a team meeting with our managers, and I said, this is really humbling and really important that we honor our residents' belief in Parks and Recreation. We have to up our game, provide even better service. Downtown, diversity, we find it in our parks all day long, and of course University of Montana, and number 10, natural resources. So in the top 10 of what our citizens value, you have Parks and Recreation heavily involved in really all of them. Probably University of Montana the least, directly. Now the partnerships with the University of Montana are insane. We do all kinds of work together with them, but even in our downtown, those trees along the sidewalks where you eat or have a beverage on the outer cafes, those are managed by parks. Terrace Park, where the markets are, those are all sites managed by the Parks Department. History of Parks and Recreation. I know you all grew up loving history. And I just share this because recreation through gardening and socials and games is one of the oldest forms of enjoyment that we have. And Parks and Recreation has changed over the years. We went through industrialization. I didn't go through industrialization. I'm not quite that old. But there was a huge movement in our country about the value and importance of really good services for people who may not have access, and about what do our places look like. It's why we have the parks like Central Park. We had this urbanization, density, poor air quality, poor water quality, poor work rules. And so we created places for respite, for recovery, for our own health. Long, long history. Settlement houses were all about recreation program services for kids who are left at home, long, long hours. Yes?
You said there's trail connections to the sidewalks in town, but where can we find out about those?
We can get you maps. And then the other thing that we can do for you is if you tell us where you live, in some cases, they're not always completely findable, and that's one of the projects we'll be working on. So happy to visit with you. And then moving on through time, the Great Depression was one of the biggest investments in Parks and Recreation in the United States. The Civilian Conservation Corps invested heavily in our public lands, in prevention of forest fires. If you go to any of the older state or national parks, you'll see the Works Progress Administration invested. And then, of course, moving into the 60s and all the turbulent times with environmental issues and the EPA, DAQ, Bureau of Outdoor Recreational Land and Water Conservation Funds, that was all during the 60s. And so we took a step back and we said, whoa, again, the pollution that's going on, we're not caring for our environment. We could do a better job of caring for our people. And so there was yet another movement. And what we've seen during the 90s was a concern about latchkey kids and an investment in 21st century after-school programs. Those things haven't changed. And finally, the Great Recession took us as a society. I think it's a great recession in the Ken Burns series on national parks, frankly. But we started saying, you know what? What we have locally is something pretty special. The fact that we have public lands and trails that we can go visit that don't cost us anything, and we can still have those powerful times together with our families, can really change our lives. That morning walk before you go to work, or evening when you get home, or the weekends you spend, are what renew us to be better human beings. We can send a parent home happy, that means that kid has a better day. We can send a kid home tired, that means a parent has a better day. So why does government provide? 9 in 10 Americans consider Parks and Rec important, and 78% want local governments to increase their spending, especially if it means better access. It's really interesting through all the studies is government tends to be pretty delayed compared to what citizens really want. And it's this balancing thing, because just like in development, the park, the green infrastructure, the human often comes last. Because we figured out how to do capital investment and construction really well in our country. We figured out how to build stuff. And I think one of the things we need to do is think about how do we take care of stuff. And one of the things that we have a hardest time funding is what I call the social fabric. Investing in kids and families and adults and aging adults who are hanging on to their homes, because if we can keep them in their homes as long as possible, they're healthier, they are happier, it's less of a cost to society, there's less medical bills, and those things work if we can make sure that they can have access to social interaction, physical activity, and nutrition. And we can do those things through parks. So as life cycles through, as our society cycles through, we often go back to Parks and Recreation to address our health and social ills. And we also perform roles in prevention and management during time of disaster. And that's unbelievable to me how many times that we have fires occur on our natural lands. Sometimes they occur on conservation lands. You think about avalanches, you think about floods. Those things are generally affecting parks. We create those spaces as buffers specifically for those reasons. The Parks and Recreation services are offered by almost every entity, agency you can imagine, and one of the biggest providers of Parks and Recreation is our military. It's really about welfare and our ability to protect our country. So it's much broader than a lot of times we think about, and there's all kinds of benefits that come out of that. We talk about social interaction. We talk about individual. If you think about yourself, and it's time to renew, and I know that I'm a little bit unusual, but I have this thing where I have to get outside in the woods or along the river for some physical exercise before I feel like I can do anything else. And so worst case today, like today, I will walk to work, which is only 2.5 miles, but I get to walk along the trail system through the tree canopy, cross a stream or a river, and so I can come in renewed. How many of us engage in really deep issues, trying to solve problems, and when I say a walk in the park, sometimes that's where we find our answers. So we achieve spiritual benefits, and I'm not talking about religious, but that sense of renew of our spirits is so important to being able to give back and to give to others and to be engaging and to be happy. Environmental benefits, and I'll dive into those much deeper, but ecosystem services, our ability to have climate resiliency, and then economic benefits. Businesses in our community, and I've spoken to the CAOs of the hospitals, to some of our high-tech leaders. When they recruit or they decide where they're going to stop and set up shop, they are visiting our facilities. So the fact that we are able to recruit pretty good businesses to retain really good employees has a lot to do with quality of life, because our wages aren't always that great. So we hopefully are able to achieve that. So how do we decide how we're going to offer things? Parks and Recreation is in a constant state of public engagement, surveys, evaluations, public open houses, design charrettes, and conducting research. We do a lot of, everything we do really comes from you. As I mentioned, there's very few things that are mandated, but there are a lot of requests from the public on new ideas, new ways to play. Land's next to my house. I'm working with the HOA one of our very few neighborhoods that is overparked. And they said, well, we could maybe use one of your park lands to generate revenue through helping the housing challenges and then invest that in your parks to improve them. And they're just like, we'll keep our park. And I was just like, we'll get there. But everybody should have access to a park. Our goal is everybody can walk to a park in 10 to 12 minutes without a major barrier. You shouldn't have to sprint across a railroad track, swim the river, anything like that. Yes?
I was wondering how you define something in the over park. Is that 10 to 12 minutes?
It's 10 to 12 minutes and 1,000 people to an acre of parkland. Now, as we look at growth policy and growing inward and growing upward, it's going to be really difficult to achieve those numbers. And so some of the things we're doing is we're going through an exercise with community, and you'll see this coming out in March. We'll be unveiling, after quite a bit of public process, new designs for East Caris and Best Reed Parks in our downtown. It's part of a follow-up to the downtown master planning process, and we know how much more housing, how many more residents are going into our downtown. So how do we use those 3 parks that are highly valuable, very popular, packed during Clark Fork Market or any festival at Caris? But how many of us go to them daily? We know there's huge numbers that go through the parks daily, but the number of people who live here who visit the park, those parks for where they are, isn't as high as it ought to be. And so we'll be looking at things like adding skating ribbons or additional play features. Could you imagine the entire under the Hagen Street Bridge filled with play as opposed to cars? Yes, we know we have to find places for the cars too, and we will do that. We talked a little bit about servant leadership earlier, and so one of the measures that we use as a department is, do those we serve grow as people? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will he or she benefit or at least not be further deprived? That is a measure that we like to use in our department with our program decisions, our staffing, how we manage lands, because we think it's really important for Missoula to continue to be Missoula and for our society to continue to care about their place and the people who live here, that we think about everybody through that process. Figuring out what to do. About every 5 years, I would like to do it every 3. We do a statistically valid survey because it's really difficult for people who have 2 or 3 jobs or single-family households to get out to public meetings and say, here's what I want. And so the top 5 things that Missoula countywide want are natural areas and habitat, more trails. 80% of the population across the state of Montana wants more trails. It doesn't matter what their background is. River access sites, paved trails for walking and biking. Did you know that Missoula is in the top 12 cities and towns for walk or especially bike to work? And that Missoula is the only town in Montana where we have more commute on our trails than we have recreation. That's pretty cool. So if you think about it, on the Milwaukee Trail near Toole Park or Hellgate River Bowl, has 2 names, depends on where you came from, there is as much traffic on that trail as 5th or 6th Street.
What?
Yes. So put all those people, all those humans on roads, and now think about our congestion. So when we talk about the Mullen Area Master Planning that's coming up, if we can create grid systems and trail systems and sidewalk systems and allow our transit system to always make right-hand turns and end up somewhere where they want to be when they're done, then we will have reduced the congestion at Mullen and Reserve. And it's really hard to think about reducing congestion When we ask citizens, how do you do that? Most of us say build wider roads. The answer is make it easier for us to walk, bus, and bike, because then we will do that. And so that's where we spend a lot of time in the transportation world. Outdoor environmental education is really important in our community. I'm sure that's not shocking to anybody here. We also ask questions about maintenance and acquisition. You know, I've been here since 1991. I've been the director since 2002. And about 5 years ago, I told Mayor Eng, and I said, sometimes I feel like our communities want for new stuff. New lands, new parks, new playgrounds, new trails is insatiable. I can't believe what has happened in the last 20 years. And then I said to him, continuing, what I'm afraid of is our appetite to keep those things well preserved and well maintained may not be the same. Because if we invest in new, we all know this, right? We have to invest in maintaining. And so we asked people. And what I liked is I saw that 37% of you support improving, renewing, and restoring features that already exist. And so we've really been focusing there, and that is part of the Conservation and Stewardship Mill Levy, which I'll share a little bit more with you. For most supported actions, this is what people expect of parks. Protecting water quality, protecting air quality, ensuring natural areas are available for recreation, and protecting habitat. When I first came here in the 90s, I came from the Midwest. And when the surveys were telling us that our responsibility as municipal parks and recreation was to take care of wildlife, that threw me for a little bit. Just because I was like, wow, I don't have wildlife biology in my basket. But we spend an immense amount of time, elk herds on jumbo, all of the riparian streams that go through parks that have bull trout habitat, and the wildlife, the osprey on the poles and what happens when they go to the wrong pole. And it's pretty crazy, and it's also pretty wonderful how much we value habitat. And so I've learned a lot about wildlife. Barriers. We asked folks what are their barriers. Most importantly, or number one, is knowing that the programs are offered. And I think we would all agree to that. And I think about Erin's presentation on how do we help people find housing. A lot of it is getting, letting people know. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I might be there, but so was this survey Missoula County or Missoula City?
It was Missoula County. And we do have statistics where we can separate city from county. But shocking to a lot of people, city and county residents are almost exactly on the same page. There's very few differences. And a lot of times it's funny because when we get political about things, we talk about how different we are. Yeah.
It's just I know that Parks and Rec is city-based, right? And then Parks, Trails, and Land
is county.
Program is county-based. So I was curious what this survey was.
It's for both, and we do have the data to separate them.
Okay, great.
Yeah. There's a bigger difference in families with children still at home and not than there is between city and county residents. And even that's very minor. And then other is just they're using other land. So this might be one of the ones, particularly in the county, where you have really much quicker access to federal or state lands than you do to your municipal parklands or county parklands. And then too busy. That's a bummer. So we have to figure out how to fit that in. And then, least common barriers, less important. But it's important for us to know which ones are, and so we ask all the questions. Desired recreation experiences. I like to ask people, why do you play? A lot of times we don't think about that. Why am I doing this? Have you ever just stopped and said, why am I doing this? Well, people want to enjoy the outdoors. They want to get exercise. They want to have fun. They want to spend time with family. And they like being in a place that's quiet. And so I'm not sure about the number 4 and number 5 immediately together, but somehow I think it works. We know that people use parks for all different reasons, and they use them for different times of the day, the week, the month, and the year for those varying reasons. Some of the things that I was a little bit surprised about is they didn't say meeting other people, because I know that a lot of our sports leagues, or, when you think about, there's a lot of apps that do meetups. They're meeting in parks. And that wasn't very high at all, so that really surprised me. And also feeling connected to community kind of completely blew me away. because I feel like that's constantly what we're doing, is connecting people in community to different initiatives that are related to parks, trails, open spaces. And so it's interesting to think about how we do things. And so when we evaluate programs, for example, and we ask people, why do you play pickleball? How many of you have played pickleball? Okay, a few. So is there anybody here that doesn't know what pickleball is?
Is it old people's tennis?
I won't tell any of the old people that. Pickleball is this great sport that it is very popular with, I'd say a majority of our players are 50 and older, but not all. It's being played a lot in physical education in the schools now because it's very inexpensive. You can put a lot of people on the court. It's super social. So one of the most important things about pickleball is you have immediate success in a sport with a ball, which doesn't happen a lot. And it's super, super social because a game lasts about 10 to 15 minutes and then you switch partners. And so when we started asking groups, you know, I ran sports leagues forever, probably since I was 15. And we asked people, why do you play? A lot of times it's not to win or beat somebody else or because I thrive on competition. It's because it's my night out with my friends. Number one is almost always social. So I started talking to our user groups about that, and I said, well, if your number one reason is to be social, why do we spend all this money on sports officials and trophies? Why don't we have a potluck instead? And some of our programs have gone there. So we share the data with them and say, if what we really want is socialization, let's go for it. We can do that too. Indoor recreation centers. Again, Erin talked about third places, and the library is super, super exciting. I think Zach is really cool if you haven't been there yet. Zootown Arts Community Center is very inviting, very engaging. We have a lot of these facilities, but you know what? We don't have an indoor facility in Missoula, Montana that's dedicated to active participation. It doesn't matter what's dance, sports, just walking, roller skating, blading, that's indoors. And we have a really long season that's icy outside. And then we have this other season that sometimes becomes very smoky. And so we're working with folks on an indoor recreation center because I think of the library as sort of our literary and intellectual third place. Zach is our artistic third place. And then a community center in McCormick Park is our physically active third place. All in the downtown, all in high-density neighborhoods that have some of the greatest social economic stratification in our community. Vision, mission, and goals. Parks provides programs, places, and services essential to quality of life. And we're inclusive, where all people can live and celebrate meaningful, purposeful, fulfilling lives through the confluence of unparalleled recreation, cultural, and entrepreneurial opportunity. How do we work? We work in 4 functional work teams. So something that's different about Parks and Recreation than some of the other departments in the city is we're sort of like a little city within the big city. So we do have planning and land acquisition and development and design and construction. And we do have maintenance. And we have recreation program services. And then we have a whole business functional team, because a lot of people don't realize that within the Parks and Recreation Department there's multiple small businesses. So Splash is a $500,000 a year business in 10 weeks. Currents is another $500,000 business. The vending and concessions within those facilities is another small business. And then Fort Missoula generates revenue off of events. And then there's all the program services. So there's multiple small businesses within the department because people who are paying to play allow us to expand programs. And we also generate revenue through donations and license plate sales and other things to make sure that we're inclusive, so people who cannot afford to play are scholarshiped into programs. So it gets to be pretty business intensive in our department. And we are also one of the few departments that not only does land acquisition, but we maintain what we build. And then we manage the behavior within the areas that we're maintaining and building. And what happens in a lot of government is one agency builds stuff, and then the other one has to maintain it, and the other one runs programs in it. So it sounds like it works really good, except for us, a lot of times somebody else is building our stuff. And so they're not always thinking about the long-term maintenance costs. And so one of the things I like about working in the city, and we're really, really focused on this, is what are the long-term operational costs? Because the capital costs are much easier to find up front than the long-term maintenance costs. So as part of the city budget, Parks and Recreation, Culture and Recreation represents 9% of the total budget. Our Parks Department budget is almost $7 million. Depending on how you group the departments, at one time we were the third largest because we were behind Fire and Police, but now Public Works is united. We have Missoula Water, so I think we're the fourth. There's been a lot of growth. We did a deep dive from fiscal year 10 to fiscal year 18 or 19, depending on where we had the statistics. We've seen a 39% increase in developed parks. Fort Missoula Regional Park, with its almost 100 acres of city land, because we didn't recount the county portion of that, increased developed parklands by 28%. And then open spaces have increased by about 20%. We've seen a 38% increase in commuter trails, which is awesome. And something a lot of you may not have known, but all those medians on every state right-of-way are parks. Parks manages more bridges than the Department of Transportation in our community. We manage all of the medians, all of the boulevards. So that's a challenge. Growth in recreation services. We have a really successful recreation program staff, and so participation has increased by 79%. Volunteer hours have increased by 63%, and even picnic shelter rentals has increased by 40%.
Hey, Don, sorry, on this particular screen, maybe you will come to it, but if you are new to Missoula and perhaps a senior, David, Christine, on the far side, can you tell them a little bit about Meg Witcher's morning program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have programs for all ages. And Morning Moves is a once-a-week hiking program where we take folks, they gather up the currents, and we go on hikes all over the valley, and then stop for coffee when we're done hiking. And the program keeps growing. We also have some neat morning aquatics classes. I can't say enough about getting to meet people through recreation programs, because it's crazy. I think about our aquatics program in particular. If somebody doesn't show up that's a regular, they're getting wellness checks about 10 minutes after class. Think about the importance of that in our society. And especially as we age, because we get separated, or when you move your family from one community to another. That ability for you, your parents and your kids to connect is absolutely essential to quality of life. Because we as humans, as much as we talk about this in Missoula, I just want to go stand on a mountain all by myself or float down the river all by myself, we are connected as human beings. And we value that social interaction. And that's how we take care of each other. So, yeah, Meg Witcher is a stellar program provider. And if we don't have the program for you, you tell us what we're missing, and she's on. We were asked, one of the questions that gets asked is, politically during budget season, is why do we spend so much money on parks? And so remember all those slides where I showed you anywhere from 20 to 70, 80% increases? Our actual annual budget has gone up 7%, and of that it's been 2.5% inflation, and we've had a 45% increase in fees. over the same years, and so it's not all taxes by any means. Defining Missoula, we talked about those hills, those rivers, those parklands, our agricultural opportunities. It's through parks. We have the River Road Farm. A lot of our community, Garden City Harvest is an amazing partner with Parks and Recreation. The Peas Farm is made possible through the Missoula County Public School lease to the city, who can sublease the Garden City Harvest. And the River Road Farm was an open space acquisition that is managed by Garden City Harvest. So bringing food to the Poverello and to the food bank and teaching the kids where food comes from is all part of the mission. Open space program is huge in this community. Since 1980, there's been four major open space bonds now. 1980 was the first one. We've had partnerships with over 60 landowners, 10 different state, federal, and local agencies protected over 7,000 acres of land, all with partnerships. So a lot about the open space program. We're going to make this available to you. So if you're in your open space program buff, dive deep. We have a wonderful history. The 1980 bond protected the Kim Williams area all the way to John Toole Park. Missoula Redevelopment Agency has been a significant partner in investing in parks. One of the best ways to reduce blight and bring back energy to a neighborhood or a community is through investment in green infrastructure. The 1995 bond bought us a lot of our viewshed in Missoula, as well as 100 acres of Port Missoula Regional Park. 2006, we were finally able to accomplish things in the South Hills and extend the trail systems, and now we have the 2018 bond. And one of the things that I can't say enough about partners in our conservation world and in our park support world is citizens also voted to increase their taxes to better steward conservation lands. And so, again, strong statement. The urban forest, did you know that your urban forest has we actually have more than 30,000 trees in the public right-of-way. That doesn't include your private trees or trees on conservation lands. And those public right-of-way trees have a value of over $102 million in ecosystem services that we save all the time. So if we could replace half of our sumps in this town with trees and bioswales, we would save an immense amount of money and we'd have cleaner air and cleaner water. So those are some of the things that we're working with in the public works realm. Yes?
How many of those trees are beyond the prime of their lives?
How many of those are at the end of their lives? A lot of them. The Urban Forest Management Plan dives real deep into how we do that. And in the 2018 bond, one of the things that we've done is we've set aside we as a community, set aside $250,000 to invest in the urban forest, because what I'm hoping we're able to do with that is leverage it again through grants, partnerships, and make that part of our goal is to reforest what happened when our original founding fathers started the forest that we know today. And you're spot on. We need to reinvest in that. We lose more trees every year than we're able to plant through a combination of storms. Some of you have noticed, like the last 4 years, we've had record droughts, record snow, record avalanches, floods, cold, you name it. That hurts trees. It's really hard for trees to survive through that, and development has been insane. And when I talk about development, I'm not just talking about houses going up. I'm talking about fiber optics going through every boulevard, cutting through the roots of the trees. And so our efforts to try and protect and preserve those trees. I'm talking about every development, and now we've got a development over here, and so let's take out the boulevard and park cars instead of have trees. And one of the things that we don't want to do is create an asphalt jungle. Like I said, yes, we're all about parking the car, but what about clean air and clean water? What about the mental health benefits? We know from research that a tree canopy, so a neighborhood that has a high quality tree canopy, literally the residents who live there are less likely to be suffering long-term from mental health and physical health issues. They recover more quickly from hospitalization. That's how important a tree is. How many of us have a favorite tree? Yes, go ahead.
Are you looking at alternatives to the maples when you're doing that? 'Cause I know maples
Yes.
need a lot of water.
Maples, the Norway maple, there are maples that are fine, that are to our culture. The Norway maple, which is what we see all over and we love in the University District in the downtown, is it is invasive to our natural areas. Greeno Park gave up to Norway maples, and so we're in a big ongoing process. It looks like a disaster zone, trying to recover riparian zone. So we don't allow the planting of Norway maples. It's not on the list. The other thing that we've done in Missoula in our new developments is, so we got done with it, we stopped Norway maples, and then we went heavily into ash. And so the most important thing we can do is not have a monoculture anywhere. And we need a diversity of forests, and so that's what we're doing. Yeah. Yes, you had one?
A lot of the parks, like Silver Park, are mostly like the lawn, or if you, like, can we have parks that have a lot of trees or like other things like that?
So a lot of the newer parks, like Silver, and then, like Fort Missoula, we planted 1,000 trees at Fort Missoula. So they're there, but the thing about a tree is you got to wait at least 20 years to notice it. People literally just walk by. So yes, they are there. What we don't have is a lot of forested developed parks in our community. And I think the reason for that is because of our Forest Service lands around us and the riparian areas, and we were so short open lawn space for sports that we used every flat piece of land we had for a field. And even when we opened up Fort Missoula Regional Park 4 years ago, the Phase 1, which is the rectangular field, within 2 years, we more than doubled what we thought would be booked out at those fields. The staff is telling me we are at capacity in what we can schedule and maintain at Fort Missoula already on the rectangular fields. You had a question?
And one more question about the urban forest. Is there requirements for developers? I see new neighborhoods made like the whole Scott Street area. That whole system of streets was built and there doesn't look like there's room or anything green growing.
There is a requirement of developers, and we do also have a policy called Complete Streets. And one of the things that happens when we, the public, don't have appropriate amount of public right-of-way, we have to decide who gets it. Do the lanes get it? Yes. Do bike lanes get it? Do parking lanes get it? Do the sidewalks get it? Or do the trees get it? I would say for the last 20 years, except for the last couple of years, the 20 years before that, the trees always lost that fight. And I think that was, in my opinion, that was very short-sighted of us as a community. So what we've been doing with Complete Streets policy and with developers is we've been trying to change the story about trees and try and think of a tree as a utility. It's absolutely essential to deliver high-quality air and water, and to manage climate resiliency and climate infrastructure. To me, it's as important. I mean, yes, we need the pipes. We need the water pipes to bring the water to us. We need sewer pipes to take it away when we're done with it. We need fiber optics. I'm not arguing those things. What I am arguing is that we have room for everything, but we have to be thoughtful about what thing has priority, and should the green thing always be the thing that goes away? Because I think long term we're going to pay the cost. So we're working really hard to change that. We're updating our ordinances, the Urban Forest Management Plan, and then eventually we're going to be updating codes. And it's a place, a lot of times people are like, well, why is parks even in that world? We work with Erin a lot on housing issues, because we don't want, at least I'll speak for myself, I want affordable, attainable housing. We want diverse community. I don't want people who can't afford a really nice house with a great yard and full tree canopy to not have a place to go. So if we're going to put people in high-density housing and smaller housing, can we at least give them some green space to escape? Can that at least be the boulevard out front so I can walk to school and be separated from cars? We built a lot of curbside sidewalks in our community. Think about that. Have you ever rolled somebody with a wheelchair down a curbside sidewalk? Every time you get to a driveway, You slide off. If you walk this time of year, as an able-bodied person, you can barely stay on the sidewalk. Where do we throw the snow from the road? We throw it on the sidewalk. Then Parks comes through, or you come through, and you push it back in the road. So now it's in the bike lane. Boulevards, snow storage. Boulevards, trees, clean air, clean water, separation between the cars and the humans. If we separate the humans from the cars, the humans will walk. If more of them walk, we have less congestion, less pollution, healthier people. Yes?
In neighborhoods where they talk about putting in sidewalks where they're not currently existing, have you guys been involved with that conversation and preserving any of the urban forests? Because
anytime a tree has to go away, we're supposed to be involved. We're not always there because a lot of people don't understand, like, whose trees are these? So we try really hard. Yes?
I have a question. If a developer wanted to plant trees, do you recommend which kind?
Yes. We recommend planting the trees. We have a program called Trees for Missoula. That's amazing. We're seeing some of our first silver cells in the downtown, which means we could have full canopy trees in those sidewalks because we've given them places for the roots to grow and not lift the sidewalks.
And another question I have now, for the peaceful coexistence of bicycles and pedestrians and cars, I'm very happy about the trail system. I live next to one, and I can several dozen trips I don't do with a car because of that. Yeah. So I had a friend from Bremen come in 2012. He's from Bremen, the bicycle city in Germany, and he was impressed how you could get anywhere. So
I'm very lucky.
But now this part where I live there is a development at the end, and the cars were a little fast there. Not many, but the ones. So I was thinking, and I had the idea. Have you ever considered something like home zones? Because I know there are many places in Missoula that don't have sidewalks, and I saw a lot of those traffic calm zones in Germany, Munich recently, and it's really interesting how the living space gets extended onto the street, where cars have to go 50 miles per hour, there are some obstacles, but you don't need any sidewalks. You don't have to widen it. The green on left and right can stay, or trees. And and kids and pedestrians, everybody can coexist peacefully there. There has to be a certain signage, there are some rules for it, and has that ever been considered?
To a degree, and you're right, it's very European. It's a hard thing to get into the United States because we are a very car-centric society. But we do have a plan for greenways, which I think you'll hear about when transportation comes to visit you, if they haven't already. And those greenways would be those calm streets where you can walk or bike in those streets. Yeah. Yes?
You talk about having ATC and after-school programs, and when that all started?
Yeah, well, let's see. We have after-school programs at every Title I school, and we do pick up at about half of the schools across the community and bring them to central locations. We run 17 camps per week all summer with about 15 kids in them, and then we deliver recreation staff to program sites across the community. I don't have a total number that includes right now for you, but it's in the thousands.
Yeah.
So, yeah. One of the challenges we have in parks.
I'm sorry. How much influence do you have working with developers? Like we live out on West Mountain Road in big development. How much influence does your department have with the developers to put in parks and trees?
It really depends on the developer. What I find is if the developer is local and they live here and they know the people that live here, they ask us for ideas and how to make their neighborhood more livable. So we worked with the developer of 44 Ranch. There's a reason there's a park that was built and ready to use when you got there, if that's your neighborhood. In other neighborhoods, it's just a battle. We have requirements in state law with a full subdivision for 11% set aside. But if we're dividing in small pieces, 11% of a 5-acre development doesn't really get us to what we need for parkland standards, and so it becomes a bigger challenge. Also, that land set aside does not include any development. So in some states, it's very different. The developer sets aside a developed park that becomes a public park. In Montana, it's very, very different.
And that's what we do live at 44 Ranch, and you know, we're supposed to have like, I don't know, 20 spaces, and I think now we're up to 10.
Yeah.
And for our neighborhood, I was wondering if another park will be added when we double.
One of the things, for any of you that live in the Mullen Greater area, so Western Reserve and between the river and I-90, make sure you're involved in the Mullen area master planning. You know, we have a plan for a future community park out there. So another, like, my dream is a Greeno and Playfair Park combined out on Grand Creek in the outer protected zones of the airport where we can't build buildings anyway. There's a lot of interest in protected. There's some pretty prime ag soils out there for agricultural protection. But if we don't do a good job of planning, things happen in little bits and pieces, and then we don't have good grid systems, we don't have good public systems. And the really important thing about those systems is when you have good grid systems, you have good parks and schools, we have high enough density, then it costs us all less in the end. And that's what people forget. The more we can share and the better we can design, the less it costs us long term. So I am well off schedule here with you folks. So I'm just looking at some of it. I'm happy to, so I'll be at Currents in McCormick Park from noon to 1 on Friday. And if anybody wants to sit and chat about parks, happy to do that. Hopefully you've noticed that I have a little bit of enthusiasm for the topic. Some of the things that I do, I'm going to just touch on a couple of things really quick. The people's understanding of ecosystem services and climate resiliency has really evolved over time. And we know that we have record changes in weather patterns or whatever you want to call them, but they're having an impact on all of us. Record development is really pushing our limits and what we can do together as a community to control what that looks like. Yes, we want development. The last thing we would want to have happen is that we're declining and that homes are emptying out and there's not enough people to rent apartments. Of course we want development, but we want good development. We want developers to be successful. Nobody's asking that they lose money. We want them to make the money that's due them. But we also want to be able to live here for the long term. So get involved. Told you about downtown master plan. Let me see here. I'm going to race through this. We talked about reforestation. Some cool stuff coming up. We're moving the lower Rattlesnake Dam, intake dam. So part of owning Missoula water means we now have dams up in the Rattlesnake Wilderness, all the way down into the Rattlesnake, on a bull and cutthroat trout stream that was one of the original indigenous people's most important places. And we are now restoring that by taking out the dam infrastructure. The dam served no damn purpose, and I'm not swearing. And so it doesn't serve a safety thing. It doesn't serve a water provision of water. So what we're going to do is we're going to be able to restore that. And there's a wooded wetland in that area that is unique to this part of the country that we're going to be able to restore. And you know what? Trout Unlimited has brought almost every penny of that project to this community through grants. So it's not the total city investment, other than staff time at this point, is $100,000. And that will be saved going down the road because Missoula Water won't have to maintain that dam. Those are the kinds of investments that we're trying to make in green infrastructure using your tax dollars intelligently. You got to stay with me on this. We are not doing what we need to do with equity. I've worked in government pretty much my whole life. And one of the things I would always share is we've got to be fair. We have to treat everybody the same. If one person asks and somebody else asks, I have to be able to say yes or no to the same question. And we're learning something different. Equal doesn't mean equity. And so we're trying to reframe, and we're looking at it through our own lens, and we're changing the language in all of our documents and in our forms and in our brochures, and we're doing training with our staff to try and figure out what is our lens, what are our own diversities. Even though we're mostly white, it's pretty amazing how diverse we are. And if we can think about equity to make things more equal, if we give people a chance to have the housing that Erin talked about, if we give those kids a chance for after school and out of school programs, if we give those aging adults an opportunity to stay home but be connected and have a healthy meal every day, then we are achieving equity. And everybody can watch the ball game or ride the right size bike. We can all have a bike, but if I can't get on, it doesn't do me any good. So we are really, I've always felt in my entire career, the door is open. Parks and Recreation is one of the most diverse departments in the city. And I realized, door open, welcome Matt out, doesn't get people in the door. We got to go see them at their table, duh. We try to do that. We need to work at it harder. We need to get people in our communities to where we can help them most. Our opportunity zone is in the west side, north side. We've got one school over there, Lowell. It has 300 students in it. It has a capacity of 500. It is the most transient school in our valley, meaning people may not even have an address. It is the most diverse school. And so one of the things we're trying to do is focus on programs there to give those kids and those families a chance to be successful. Because if we can change the success rather than the succession or the pattern of what's been, then we can change their outlook on life, and they can invest back in our community. So that's what we do through program services, whether it's yoga in the park, Kids Fest. This is what we try and do, is we make adults play pickleball so that when they get home as grandparents, they can take care of their kids and just haul them right up into bed. That is a happy day with kids. Aquatics, 170 to 180,000 swims a year. These are place-making facilities. They run like a business. I'm happy to share all this with you. Fort Missoula Regional Park, unbelievable. We've had everything there from veterans and military services to every kind of sport and dance you could imagine. Montana Rail Link Park is a perfect example of placemaking. Franklin to Fort is one of our most underserved, highest dense, most socioeconomic diverse neighborhoods. Totally underparked. This place is busy all the time. That dog park is the busiest dog park in town, I swear.
They have a pickleball court there too.
And they have a pickleball court, and they have a playground, and they have a garden, and they have open play space, and there are a lot of trees planted there, and we're doing more. We work with partners all the time. Buy the license plate that helps us in our equity mission. Support Friends of Missoula Parks. They're our 501c3 fiscal partner. We're one of the only departments that actually goes out trying to raise money as a city. I once had a citizen tell me one thing great about an investment in parks is I know that whatever I invest, there's going to be more money coming from that, so it's like an investment. And then we work with all of these folks, and then I just ran out of room because I think I could fill several slides, because we're in the business of land, and we're in the business of people, and we're in the business of economic growth and environmental and human sustainability and justice. Thank you.
Question about the piece of property off of Craig Lane.
Yes.
Where you have all the trucks.
Yes.
Any thought about repurposing that for open space?
Yes, it's actually dedicated parkland that we want to restore to parkland as soon as we can find a place for our shop. And my site's on a few spots, but hopefully we'll be able to do it. And actually we're outgrowing the site. It would be much better served as parkland. Yes?
Is our park in Fort Ranch, city park, or is it
The big park where the playground and all that is a city park, but the pond at the east end of the park is maintained by the HOA.
And if I go to
Programs? If you go to MissoulaParks.org, a brochure should show up that you can just click on and you can go through that. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Next week, we're going to be meeting at the Missoula Water Facility out on West Broadway.